Gibson here as well. Ned Galloway as well. This show is going to be great. Real Talk with Keith Smith. The show hasn't started, and you got to
took about 30 seconds before it went down.
Throwing darts
We
already.
kid because we care.
Yeah, okay.
You know that. We kid because we care.
Should I believe that?
That's true. You know that. All right, guys. So if you want to get involved with the show, we'll probably talk some comp plan. We'll talk some planning. We may talk some lasagna today. The Free Enterprise Forum loves the pop culture references. Neil Williamson is Mr. Pop Culture. I really did love that. It was fantastic. It got a bunch of retweets, if you've noticed, across the I Love Seagull network. Ned Galloway's in the house, freshly haircutted.
Yes.
Freshly shaven.
Yes,
Man looks like he's 35 years old.
that's right.
Looking good. Galloway.
35? He told me he was 35 last night.
Last time he was here, you had the playoff beard.
Yeah.
Keith, how does that good, clean shave look?
Oh!
Now, 1 minute. Well, we're exactly 2 minutes
So
into
Keith
it.
Smith may or may not have to shave his mustache about, 10 months from now? And it's the future land use map. Neil and Keith
I'm
have
just
a bet
looking
on
at the
it.
green on the board over there.
We finally have a little bit of green on the
Little bit of
board
green on the
here
board.
on Wall Street after 45 days of disaster. Maybe not 45,
This
since
is
Jackson
vacation-
Hole.
This is vacation, Neil. Is that what this is? Vacation?
I love vacation.
Generally, you treat me with a little bit of respect until about. Okay, no, not really.
I love Neil Williamson. Vacation Neil Williamson, professional Neil Williamson, any Neil Williamson I love. Judah Woodcower is the infrastructure behind the set. We can start, my friend, when you are ready. Good Friday morning, guys. My name is Jerry Miller, and welcome to Real Talk with Keith Smith. Thank you kindly for joining us here on the I Live Seaville Network. Today's show, of course, presented by Keller Williams Alliance and Yes Realty Partners. So much to cover on today's program, and I think you will realize how much we have to cover by the time you see the panel and the folks that we have around the table here, which you will in a matter of moments. Our audience is Charlottesville, Central Virginia, Commonwealth country, and worldwide. We are live on every social platform known to mankind, and the content, as we've explained to many of our guests, lives on the internet forever,
And
where
the
people
host.
can reference it forever on
And
the
the host.
internet. If you, the viewer and listener, would like to jump in with some questions or help steer the ship, you're happy to do that. You can certainly do that by leaving your thoughts in the comments section. Judah Woodcower, we applaud the director behind the camera. If you can go to the studio camera and welcome our stakeholders to the show. We have 4 of them that I think are established and known commodities with quite a few people watching. Christine Jacobs is the executive director of the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission. She's over here. Keith Smith, our brother from another mother. Neil Williamson, the king of content, the president of the Free Enterprise Forum. And Ned Galloway, looking quite dapper over here.
Do we have a moniker for him? I don't
He
think
is
we
the board supervisor for Galloway, for Ned Galloway.
We have to have some sort of.
Cool guy,
Yeah,
all around A+ dude.
okay. We'll have to think of one through.
A guy like having on the show.
We'll have to think about something
Yeah.
during the show.
Connects with Almore Countyans quite well. How's that? You like all those?
Oh, I like all this.
Yeah, he likes all those. I
That's
know
not
he
what
does.
I was thinking, but that's okay. We'll catch up on that later.
Why don't we do this? We'll get Christine to the mix. Introduce yourself to everybody that's watching the program.
Christine Jacobs, Executive Director, Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission. I've been with the agency just over 4 years.
Keith Smith, you know her quite well.
Yeah, she keeps on hitting me underneath the table. Behave, behave,
You're
behave.
sharing a mic.
Yeah, we're sharing a mic, which is not going to end well. Oh, how long have we known each other? 5 years? Has it been 5 years? 5 years, yeah.
5 years.
5 years, yeah.
Fantastic.
Started with the Land Trust as our executive director, and then climbed up the ladder, and now is the executive director of Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission. She gets to manage folks like Ned and I on a regular basis. But you're sitting to my left today for a specific reason. You want to make some sort of announcement, and this is a great opportunity to do that. So I'm gonna.
I like announcements.
This is difficult for me, but I'm gonna slide the microphone over to you.
Thank you, Keith. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on the show. The Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission has been working on a regional transit vision plan. It was funded by the Department of Rail and Public Transportation with local matches from Albemarle County, thank you, and the city of Charlottesville, to look at a vision for transit in the region, to look at expanding transit options, making it more regular, more reliable, more frequent. And so we started with this vision plan. We've been through 2 rounds of public engagement. Our public engagement ends September 15th, and so we're doing a final push to get people to engage in the process, to think about what transit is and can be in this area and what it means for you either as a transit-dependent rider or someone who would consider transit if it were more available and accessible.
Or robust.
Or robust.
Transit in the news cycle more than ever, with kids returning to school. So I love that we're spotlighting and highlighting this. We'll welcome NBC 29 to the show. Our friend John Blair in Stanton is watching the broadcast. We love you, John Blair. Christine, the show's yours. Give us some more details.
Sure. On the TJPDC's website, there's a project page that you can go to, and we have a survey up. And what we've done is we've looked at transit in 2 different ways. One of them is with a constrained vision. If we had to put constraints on the budget, which we always have to think about, and we assume a certain amount of parameters around that budget, what can we do in this region? What's possible? There's another vision of unconstrained. Let's not worry about the financial constraints and let's really think big about what we can do compared to what we've seen other regions accomplish. And so what we want folks to do is go on and look at that survey and look at that transit network and think about what that would mean for them as either a transit-dependent rider, someone who relies on it to get to work and to do their daily shopping, but also as someone who really should be considering reducing the use of single occupancy vehicles and for all the right reasons that we want to consider public transit, as Keith I'm sure we'll get to in the paper. But for us it's really important that this is the vision of the community, and so the more robust our engagement can be, the better. We've had a very robust engagement to date. We've done a lot of in-person events at the Downtown Transit Center. We've had a lot of focus groups. We've done a lot of community events where we've been there tabling. And so we just want to do a final push to say, your voice matters. And this vision then sets the next stages for the phases of being able to implement. How do we fund this? How do we implement this? And so we want to make sure to hear from the community what their needs are and what their wishes are for public transit.
So I've got an actual newspaper in my hand. Thank you, Daily Progress. Did not realize it's $1.50.
It's $1.50. Wow.
$1.50. I went to the actual machine that you pull it out of the thing, and I only had $1 in my pocket. So
does it take dollars? Do the newspaper boxes take dollars now?
I had 4 quarters in my truck because who carries cash anymore? And the good news was, much like how I got out of the parking garage, I kind of finagled my way into a newspaper on that because I was short 50 cents. But if you read the Daily Progress,
I kind of want to know that story. How did you get the newspaper out of the box with 4 quarters
It's funny.
when you needed 6?
Mine's actually delivered to my house. I pay someone to do that.
Really? So you see that whole point, pay?
It's a subscription.
No, I went into Food Lion and I said, hey, yeah. Finagled my way, and they said, take a newspaper, go. I said, I'm doing this show. I got Christine Jacobs on, Ned Galloway, and then this guy Neil.
And they just gave you a paper.
I'm just glad this
They gave me a paper.
I'm glad this
How
didn't involve a
badly did they want
screwdriver
out?
wrangling open the.
They want it out. Yeah, that's what happened. Maybe that's what it was, Neil. Do we need this guy to go away and take a newspaper? But there's 2 projects. One is a proposed project, which is great to hear that they're proposing a project of east-westbound, Charlottesville, Richmond, Charlottesville, the beach, which is great. And then it looks like there's a great article written in the Daily Progress about Virginia expands its route and sees more riders. And those who watch and listen to the show know that Yona and I use that to go up north all the time. We love it.
Yeah, the reality is this proposed project has been 40 years in the making and probably won't get off the ground. Well, rails don't get off the ground for another 40 years.
Well, the tagline, sir, is proposed project totally on the rails, which I thought was rather clever.
Let's get Nat Galloway in the mix here. Anywhere you want to go on this topic, Nat?
Well, I would say that, that they're trying to collect public comment or public engagement for transit, that I think the trick or what I would encourage are folks that don't see themselves as current transit riders in the urban ring because they're not on a bus line and they can't conceive of how a fixed route would work for them. that they still should have a voice to say, okay, here's how transit would work in a community like mine. And I always use Woodbrook as the example. Woodbrook's out, right off of 29. It's one way in, one way out of that neighborhood. If you want to go to Kroger, which is what, a quarter of a mile, it's across 29. You can't walk because you'd be taking your life into your hands to get across the road.
Playing Frogger.
So you have to get in your car to drive across Rio to go to Kroger and some of those shops. Same if any of the other places in that piece. The bus line is down at the Fashion Square Mall, so you're not going to walk down there to get on the bus to go to Walmart or something like that. So the micro-transit program that's going to be a pilot could work for a neighborhood like that, where the micro-transit bus comes in, picks up several people in Woodbrook, takes them to Kroger, takes them to Target, takes them to, down to anywhere else along 29 in that transit area. And now people might start thinking, I don't need to do my car to go do quick 4 or 5 different stops in a half-mile radius. And if they're not thinking in those terms, they're not going to give the public engagement, and you need to hear from folks that go, okay, even though I don't live on a transit line, here's how it would work for me in my neighborhood, and we need to hear from them, because the only way to expand and get to those creative type of services is to hear that, yeah, if this was available, I'd use it.
So Christine, this is a real estate show, right?
Yeah.
So let's try to connect what you're trying to do with the transit to, say, housing affordability or the real estate market. How does that connection happen?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that the provision of public transit related to affordable housing especially is one and the same issue, right? We can't expect to increase density and not have those folks that are living in more dense communities have access to walkable, transit-friendly communities, right? But that goes beyond the affordable housing community. Like this is housing for everybody, and really providing alternatives to everybody getting in an individual car to commute or to do their errands. There are very efficient, cost-efficient, but also time-efficient ways to do that with mass transit, where we don't all have to be jumping in our cars. It saves on money, it protects the environment. I mean, there's numerous ways. I think related to housing, I don't know that you can disconnect the two of those conversations.
So on Wednesday, Jerry and I were talking, and Neil was kicking in on a piece of property just closed on the IGA property on Cherry Avenue.
Kim's Market, yep.
Kim's Market, thank you. So I think in order for this to work, and this might get tied into something that Neil wants to jump in on, is back on the zoning side, we really need to reduce these parking requirements. So the city of Charlottesville right now has like 1.5 parking spaces per unit. So if we have a more robust transit system, it kind of connects into, let's walk back some of the parking requirements.
Well, I would agree, but one of the other parts of transit, microtransit being exclusive, but my vision of transit has always been a dumbbell. You have a place where a lot of people are and a place where a lot of people want to go. And so transit is that connector that provides that. If we have increased density, my daughter lives in Boston, and she was telling me that yesterday and the day before, the toughest days in Boston, every apartment in Boston turns over on the 31st of August. Every apartment, that's when the lease goes. So it's an insane day for traffic. The buses have issues. Even their T-line, I actually have a Charlie card in my wallet so that I can jump off the airplane and jump on the tram and get out to her place, which was at the end of the line. That's where real estate comes in. Her house she purchased at the end of the transit line because her husband has to go to the hospital center on the transit line, and she has to go to some small educational place called MIT, which is just off the transit line, and she can take her bus. I don't know, it's over my pay grade.
She's a very smart Williamson, his daughter. One thing we talked about was it Ted Reek of Jaunt?
Yeah.
Was the unification of transit under one potential brand. We have all these splintered brands all over Central Virginia. Why don't we have, and maybe this is a question for you, if you could educate us, why isn't there just a Central Virginia transportation system that creates economies of scale and vertical integration with Jaunt and CAT and all these other brands that are out there? Thoughts?
Excellent question. Feels a little bit like a softball. So as a part of the regional vision plan, our next venture is into a governance study. And we want to look at the governance of the existing agencies and the funding coming in and the funding going out. And we want to think about what governance structure would need to be in place in order to implement what comes out of the vision. And so that's not only what types of funding are we going to need to bring in from either the state or federal level, but it is also how are we going to allocate those funds and how are we going to get to a point where we can do consolidation, more collaboration, more shared use of existing resources and capital, things like that. So this is a multi-phase project. I think before we can jump into what is it going to cost and where are the bus lines going to stop, we need to get into what does the community need, what is going to serve people's needs.
And speaking of governance, 2 terms on the board?
In the second term.
In the second term here. I mean, what do you make of this? The unification of all these maybe
Well, I
splinter
remember
brands?
running for the first term, even though I was not opposed, there was a candidate forum, and I remember both myself and Supervisor McKeel involved in that, calling for the need of and our support for a regional transit authority.
And that would be 6 years ago?
That was 6 years ago.
Which we
So
did have one.
the regional transit partnership was kind of the first step towards getting at that conversation, and I think the study gets us closer to that conversation. It's just a matter of, who knows what the time frame will be by the time something like that comes to fruition. But it does seem to be something it looks like we're pointing towards or in the direction of moving to.
And there is legislation that exists in the state of Virginia to authorize a regional transit authority in this area. There was no funding attached to that. And so that's where it fell a little bit short in order to be able to then implement. The part of the governance study is to look at that legislation. It was passed in '09, so it needs a deep dive to see if there are changes that need to happen. And then looking at, okay, if we were to go with an authority, what would that look like? There's several different models of what transit authorities and transportation authorities look like, and we would have to really analyze what does this region need.
So
And I don't think 6 years ago, the need in the urban ring of the county, from a transit perspective, now there were transit-reliant people that the fixed routes just didn't work for. They live on hydraulic and work on pantops, and the bus ride's 2 hours. That's ridiculous.
Yep.
Just to get through all the transfers. But, so I'm not meaning to say there weren't people reliant on transit then, but I think there's a broader, there's more density than there was 6 years ago.
Gas
in
is
the
more
urban ring.
expensive.
Gas, folks are really honing in more on trying to reduce the use of vehicles, so there's a different push on that. So I think there's a different vibe or a different context that will help move us into that direction faster than maybe what's existed over the last 5 or 6 years.
I agree, and I think, what's important for us at the PDC is we're always thinking regionalism, right? And most people think of public transit as an urban service, as a fixed route urban service, but transit in our area could be very regional. It could include all of our rural governments. It could do fixed route into our rural governments with more regular service. It can include micro-transit. There's a lot of different models that can be used to help people come into the urban areas or reverse commute out of the urban areas that work in other places. So while this is really important for our urban area, it's just as important for our rural areas to be able to also have transportation alternatives to getting in a car.
But Jaunt's doing that now, right? Jaunt has Lake Monticello, they have connector buses, right? That Jaunt has connector buses to the other side of the hill, right? In that end of it, and it's another program within the commission, which is the rideshare program, which it seems to me anyway, the rideshare lots that I see are starting to kind of increase in cars in there, and it seems like that rideshare is picking up.
Well, it's fascinating to me to look at different stories and different localities at different times. Right now in San Francisco, you have Silicon Valley vans picking up employees at the bus station, at the bus stop. And
A private service.
A private service. And the air-conditioned Wi-Fi so they can work on their way to work. When I was growing up 100 years ago, when Metro was started in D.C., what was the number one thing that made Metro work?
Accessibility,
Nope.
cost.
Federal government stopped paying for parking. And when that happened, all of a sudden they were giving out fare cards. And so we need to get the community engaged in a way with employers and the big employers, because right now I know UVA employees that have to drive to U-Haul and park, and then hop on the UTS bus to get to the hospital. And that's their model of getting to work, and that's where their parking is. If we could come up with a way that they could grab that bus in Greene County or Fluvanna County and ride in, or Crozet, or whatever, make it so that it is easier, That, I think, is one of the important parts. The governance is important too, and we see different models across the state in governance. And I think funding and governance have to be tied together, because if you're paying, you should be the one stating how you're playing.
Ooh, I like that. Matt Galloway, you gotta follow that right there. What do you think about that?
That's a campaign slogan.
I know, that's a tagline. That's a tagline.
But we have a kind of one big elephant in the room, which is UVA, right? And is UVA engaged in this process?
Yes.
Engaged in the good. I'm glad to hear
Yes,
that.
UTS has been a willing and very, they've contributed a lot actually to the network design and looking at their existing routes and CATS and JAUNTS and trying to think of, let's take all of that aside and say what makes sense. And perhaps there are routes that UTS is running that make more sense as a public transit option to allow them to do more on grounds and within the student and employee community rather than commuting people in and out. So they've been a very willing partner. We've been very pleased.
So I promised Christine that I would keep her here for only 10 minutes. That was about 5 or 8 minutes ago.
Well, I got a couple questions. We have questions for her.
I was
Yeah,
just about to say,
yeah.
do we have anything on the feed?
How many transportation brands are there? You have 3 media outlets locally watching you here. How many transportation brands out there in the Central Virginia community?
Right now?
Yeah.
CAT, UTS, and JAUNT are our
Okay.
3 main providers.
Those 3 right there. And then you've got Charlottesville Public Schools utilizing CAT for students. That's more in the news than ever before with the bus driver shortage. This question's come in, how is the University of Virginia, besides what you just described, at the table, talking transportation, and for, I'll include this, flexing their muscles, because as he says, they're the gorilla here in Central Virginia.
I can't speak to how they're going to flex their muscle, but I can say that they are at the table. They are one of the key stakeholders, as are the local jurisdictions, as are the transit providers, as are the community members, to make sure that what comes out of this, it meets the needs of not just one of those sectors, but all of them. So UVA is engaged.
Yeah, so then I can speak a little bit to this, the Regional Housing Partnership, and now the Transit Partnership has UVA at the table.
Mm-hmm.
That has not always been the case, and that is kind of a recent, last few years. So that's great to have UVA.
Well,
at the table.
in having them and all the parties at the transit partnership, they're already starting to build relationships. Think about the other systems. If I'm the university and I just have to conceive of a transit operation for my little area, well, then why would I think of everything else? So when you start going to a regional transit partnership meeting, then that's where the ideas and connections of how these other things work. So that's why I believe there won't be any fear of losing turf or power by going towards a regional transit authority, or at least that's my hope.
And I would throw out that there's one more transit brand out there. The County of Albemarle operates a fleet of buses.
The public.
Transportation is now a very sexy topic. I mean, when you think about it, it shows how far we have come when it comes to transportation. Philip Dow says this: I just retired and I live in the wonderful town of Scottsville. My office was on Water Street. I depend on the rideshare programs. They were great. They saved me a ton of money on gas. Kevin Yancey's watching in Waynesboro. Albemarle County and Charlottesville need to seriously explore different ways to get beyond the Rivanna River. There are smaller secondary roads that address this somewhat, but mass avenues for the public to get past the 2 choke points in the county leading into the city are critically important. That's a good comment right there. You want to touch on any of this stuff, Keith Smith, or go anywhere you want to go?
Yeah, so 100% right. It's just, I think to Ned's point, everybody, or maybe it was Neil that mentioned it, everybody's kind of been in their sandbox for a real long time. So this may sound like baby steps, but we're actually moving forward. When you have this partnership and you have the people at the table, I mean, a prime example of that is, UVA is in earnest working on its 1,500 affordable housing units or a housing affordability program, which is going to have to include transit, right? Because they're going to be putting rental units on Fifeville and over on 10th and, help me out,
Page.
10th and Page?
Yeah, it's right there at the
10th and 8th.
8th, great.
10th and 8th, thank you, Neil. On that, so there's going to have to be, a transportation component to that. And when they get out to the north of town, there's definitely going to have to be a transportation component to it. So I'm excited that everybody's at the table.
What do you think, Neil? Anything?
Well, I think that in addition, we're going to see continued development north of 29 in the research park, including at the current plan, which is an updated plan from the other new plan, which was updated from the first plan, regarding housing in the North Fork Research Park.
Is that a lasagna reference?
Well, it's known as North Fork Research Park. It used to be known as Research Park,
That's
and
right.
now it's anyway. But there are going to be new connections there, connecting to Airport Road to provide an additional parallel network of roads to those residents being able to get to Hollymead Town Center and on that side. And then we start to talk about something that was at one time in the misnomer Solutions 29, an Ashwood Boulevard Bridge, which, that may happen in my lifetime and it may not. But certainly transit along that corridor makes a lot of sense.
Johnny Ornalis watching the program.
Hey, Johnny. Hey,
He
Johnny.
just shared the show. He owns Guadalajara and El Mariachi. This is an interesting question from Kelsey watching in Keswick. Did COVID create tailwinds or headwinds for transportation, public transportation, and how have you guys navigated those?
Yes, it has.
All the above.
All of the above.
Right.
Certainly, we have seen the reduction in workforce related to transit, the driver shortage that's occurred, not only in our community, but across the nation. We've also seen the financial pressure on households, that perhaps driving is now no longer within their reach, and so they need another option. And so I think COVID absolutely has affected not just what's happening right now in transit, but how people are looking at it and how important of an infrastructure it is in a community.
And people didn't want to get into a bus with COVID.
Right, exactly right.
And
true.
and the powers that be eliminated the fares.
But then they wanted to get in a bus when gasoline got over $4. And then they were like, get me in that bus, please, dear God.
The ridership numbers have not returned to pre-COVID levels.
Is that the case?
That is correct.
That is the case. Hillsdale's watching the Hillsdale Conference Center. Neil Williamson is a fan over there. They're giving him some props.
I believe he's a rock star over there.
He
When
has
he
an
walks
office
in-
at
When he
Hillsdale.
walks in the building, everybody has to go,
He has an office over at Hillsdale. So let's get Ned Galloway in the mix here. So what would be the next steps from, say, a board standpoint? And I know that's a broad question here.
Well, Albemarle, aside from the school system and the bus fleet that the school division operates, we do not operate a system. So we pay for the services that CAT provides. So, your options would be you have to get into be a transit provider and take on your own piece, or you have to work with what exists and build those partnerships and figure out what the vision and game plan is moving forward to help your citizens. So like that regional, one of the workforce pieces right now, since they're all separate entities, is that bus drivers, they're over here, and then this decides to pay $3 more an hour, so then they all go get those jobs and leave this one in a lurch. A regional transit authority could equalize that wage for all of those different entities, potentially.
Yeah.
And that could help this, both for the employees, give them some stability. I mean, you got to, if you need the $3 extra an hour or whatever the wage increase is, of course you're going to make the move. But then that means that you have a gap in service somewhere else. So, I think from what our board looks at, you've got different, even with the 6 supervisors, you have different priorities because of the majority of what you represent. Supervisor McKeel and myself are very concerned about the urban ring, and specifically how fixed route doesn't necessarily provide the level of service that we would need to make it useful for people or effective for people. And then you have folks like Supervisor Price who think of, well, how do you get Scottsville up to Charlottesville? And then Supervisor Malik's going to be talking about how do you get rural transit to work. So you've got these different conundrums, if you would, that we have to think about, well, what's the strategy going to be? And if we only have fixed route services that is typically designed for CAT, and Jaunt is kind of a very specific type of provider as well, then we have to just keep pushing to say, well, we need these other inventions, I guess, to get this done, and then obviously we'll have to back up that vision with some money and some votes to make it
back to
happen.
the survey, that's what the survey's about, right?
What do you want, right?
Right, that the survey is what the community wants, and hopefully we can start plugging it in. I'm going to pivot to green, right? We've been talking about this for quite some time.
Green's booming.
Green is booming. I can say that this time next year we're going to be saying green is probably top of the list of new construction units coming in. A substantial amount of them about ready to go into the ground you're a Green resident, from your perspective, how does that transit connection work for you?
Well, the reality is Jaunt has acquired Greene County Transit. That was consummated about last June, I think. That transit service is a limited service. I believe that you're going to, part of the reason you're seeing a boom in Greene, I know they're
Affordability.
both affordability and, as Supervisor Galloway knows, it's a lack of diversity and density in Albemarle County, because that creates leapfrog development. And so folks still want to be close to work, and they need a home. So where do they go? And that's why you see the leapfrog, and there are about 2,000 units approved just over the Albemarle County, Greene County line. And those will be coming online over the next 5 years.
So to put that into perspective, that's a little less than 50% of what's in Lake Monticello right now. Lake Monticello is about 4,300 homes. So thank you for adding that number. I was hoping you did it instead of me. But we're going to be seeing about 2,000 more homes, depending on how the market goes and all that great stuff. Within 5 years, that's a substantial traffic, and it's going to be, let's say, at the more affordable price point, which...
It's an interesting, the markets will do what the markets will do, but you will have some density there, and you will have that dumbbell. You will have a place where a lot of people are and a place where a lot of people want to be. So it seems to me like a transit link there would make a lot of sense. And so hopefully that's something that will come in the next 5 to 10 years.
And within the Transit Vision Plan, if you look at the unconstrained network, one of the recommendations that we're anticipating seeing out of that is bus rapid transit up and down 29, and that's the dedicated bus lanes that have stops that aren't as close together, that run more frequently to really move. And so that would be a longer term vision that would require a little bit more investment in order to realize, but would do exactly what you're talking about, which is moving more people from places like Greene, which I'm also a resident of, who would take transit if it was convenient.
But that unrestrained plan starts with the phrase "once upon a time."
So let's back up for a second, folks, for those who are watching or listening.
The feed is blowing up right now, by the way.
So let's define, please, restraint and unrestraint. You know, we're all in this. What define what restraint means and what unrestrained. I mean, I know what the words mean.
A constrained vision means we have to set a sort of parameters around funding, right? It's constrained by a budget. And so what we did was we looked at other transit and transportation authorities and what revenue sources they were using, and we made a sort of assumptions around that. If Charlottesville area, the region, utilized those same revenue sources, how much money could we generate and what could we do with that money?
Revenue sources are taxes.
Correct.
Keep going.
The unconstrained vision then takes off that funding and says, if we weren't necessarily looking at the funding constraints, what would we do so that we can truly identify what a vision would look like and what we need to move towards long term, but is going to require a much more significant investment in order to realize.
So it's wrapped around dollars.
Yes.
Got it.
Like everything.
Well, transit doesn't pay for itself.
Well, that
right?
question just came in the feed. Can transit be profitable, or is it a public utility? Should we change how we look at transportation? You want to touch that one?
I would leave that answer to a transit operator, but I would say that it is a public utility.
Public utility. What do you guys think?
Well, I mean, we talk about it like it's a public utility. We anytime there's a land use decision in front of us, or transit's being used as a
Potential solution.
or a positive, a way to say that you should do it, negative or positive, it's being used as a utility, so.
This question's come in the mix here. Regional authority examples. Christine mentioned regional authorities earlier in the show. Can she give some examples that are being considered?
For local?
Around the country.
Well, within Virginia, the Richmond area has the CVTA, Central Virginia Transit Authority. Down in the southeast, there is a transportation authority. CVTA is Central Virginia Transportation Authority, not just focused on transit. There's also one in Northern Virginia. So there's several within the state.
That's the granddaddy. It's 40, no, it's probably 60 years old now. WAMTA.
WMATA.
So with that, because it's constantly surprising, not surprising, it's just unbelievable how smart I can get this out. Our viewers and listeners are, because I was writing a note down to ask that very question. any examples that are similar in our size, right? Because, Northern Virginia is huge, right? So
Richmond's bigger than
a
us.
lot of-
And it's Northern
Rich-
Virginia, DC, it's multiple states.
It's huge, a lot of tax dollars. Richmond's huge, a lot of tax dollars. We're like 300,000 plus or minus folks in our region. Is there any authority that's about that size?
Part of the scope of work of the governance study is to look at peer examples. And so it's to identify other authorities that exist in communities of our size that also have a university.
There you go.
And so that's a part of the next phase of the study.
Yeah, the one that comes to mind would be, I just lost it. Clemson is almost the same size, same kind of a structure on that. So we're going to look outside of the state, right? Okay, great.
We do know some people with some Clemson connections,
Yeah,
if I remember
yeah.
right.
I almost said the name, but then I realized that I should back off a little bit.
Laquan says this, to Ms. Jacobs' comments of what we want from transportation, we want more routes that are on time that we can rely upon to get to and from work and our families. So I respect that comment. I appreciate Laquan chiming in. To Nat Galloway's point, Louisa County school bus drivers, their school system is completely full with bus drivers because they offered more money than Albemarle County and Charlottesville City public schools, and the cost of living is lower. So why wouldn't you take that job if you're a school bus driver? Where Albemarle County school system and Charlottesville are struggling to find bus drivers. Johnny Ordnala says transit in the outer Albemarle area could be easier if each community would provide shuttle buses that would be provided like Old Trail, where they take people to and from the bus stops. Perhaps that's an HOA addition with the neighborhoods. That segues me into asking what's the role of the developer with a regional transit authority as the developer is bringing neighborhoods or plans to market. Who wants to touch that topic right there?
Neil, why don't you touch that
Well,
one?
I think it's important to recognize that transit is a community need. And adding 40 homes doesn't create a need for transit. The need exists. And anything that's being required of anyone developing their land needs to be appropriately petitioned for the direct impact of those homes. And that's really getting at it. We were talking about, does transit pay for itself? Roads don't pay for themselves either. And it's important to recognize that. I think that there have been a number of developments recently that have put forth plans that include building out curb cuts to allow for transit pull-offs and transit shelters. There's something that I think...
What's a transit shelter? Like a bus stop with a roof?
Yeah, 6 years ago, I think I heard a young Ned Galloway talk about folks standing on Rio Road next to a sign that has no shoulder for the bus stop.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's improved.
Same way.
Yeah, well said. And young Ned Galloway might be sitting next to me right now. I mean, look at this man.
Younger.
Looking younger. He's found the fountain of youth over here.
So I want to throw a question to Johnny.
Sure.
Everybody was talking. So Johnny, awesome business owner. So if there was some...
El Mariachi in Guadalajara, oh my goodness.
If there was a program where the businesses can contribute somehow into it, so in other words, so his employees can get to and from, is there a way to bring in the private sector a little bit into this conversation? And I'm just curious from Johnny's perspective.
Because the thinking is the F&B businesses are struggling to find staff. Are they struggling to find staff because the staff can't afford to live in Charlottesville and Albemarle County? And why would they want to drive 45 minutes to the restaurant to work $15 an hour when it's going to cost $30 round trip or $20 round trip to drive to work? That's what you're saying.
Yeah, that.
That's exactly what he's saying.
Exactly what
Right,
I'm saying.
right. So that's a great question. Johnny Ornelas, would that be a co-op? Is that a co-op?
I don't know what it is. I just was wondering, as a business owner, can I contribute in some way to help my employees get there? Other than paying fares, because we know it requires a little bit more. It was just a little spitball idea. I was just curious what he thought about.
What's your take on that, J.O.? How about this question from Grayson?
smiling, so
Can we get away from gas-powered buses, please? Does anyone want to touch on that one? I mean, that's a topic that's being discussed now. I believe Lloyd Snook mentioned on this talk show about a month ago that they're dabbling in. Neil, maybe you can jump in and offer some perspective here with some non-gas powered buses. They're looking, I believe, in a hybrid situation in the
natural
short
gas
term,
hybrid,
as opposed to like the Tesla version of a bus right now.
Right, there are, it's fascinating, the funding for the infrastructure of vehicles is so bureaucratic. It is involved in federal funding, and in order to be innovative, it's incredibly difficult. But CAT is looking at innovative fueling options. The thing is, you have to test it, and you have to make certain you can get the parts for those buses. Because if the bus breaks down and you can't get the part, you don't have a bus. And all of a sudden, the money you spent on it is worthless. And you have to have mechanics that can work on it.
Right.
It's a huge game of Jenga as we move into this brave new world.
I like it.
There's a game we can play live.
Jenga's awesome. This question's come in, why not make it private? Private businesses are more nimble, they have to innovate, they have to pivot. Why not make transportation private? Who wants to touch on that?
Well, it's a simple answer. It won't make money. It won't make money. You won't be able to charge enough.
Andre Xavier, Seville Hop on Tour seem to be making money on
He's doing
transportation.
great, but that's a very specific, laser-focused, thing.
I could catch a hop on tour to Well Hung Vineyards and have fantastic wine right there.
And it's a great business model. Love that family to death. But as a regional transit, it's just the numbers. What will work is like a PPEA, right? Some sort of public-private
Education Act.
Education Act. Thank you. So I promise,
Yeah.
Christine, 10 minutes. Is there any questions
I mean,
specifically?
there's a lot, but I
Specifically
mean,
that might, Christine?
got 40
We'll talk about it after.
transportation, I think we need to get this back on Real Talk here.
I know. we've
Because
been-
people are hurting. The dollar's
Yeah.
not going as far anymore.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
But
She's got to go. She's driving to Indianapolis.
she's driving to Indianapolis.
Dude, you're a rock star here. People want more from you here, Christine.
Literally at the board meeting commission meeting last night, I was like, okay, I promise I'll get you out in 10 minutes. I had my fingers crossed.
She knew that was not going to happen. Didn't you know that?
Everyone
I
at
did
the
not
table
schedule
knew.
my next meeting until 11.
Yeah, see, she knew. She
Hold
knew.
it. You said 11:15?
I gotta run.
She's got to go. She's got to go. She's got to go. Thank you. You
My
were
pleasure.
awesome.
I appreciate you guys letting me
Absolutely
be here.
awesome. Thank you for joining us. Judah, we'll go to the studio camera. Keith will slide over. You can slide that chair over there. Keith Smith. Neil Williamson, jump in here on any of these topics, my friend.
Well, the idea of privatization is interesting. When you get to major employers, that's what you're seeing. For years, we saw it with State Farm. The buses, their vans would run, they'd go into gated communities and pick people up.
Willow Tree was
But
doing
that's
that
not
as well.
privatization of a regional.
No, it's privately provided transportation.
Okay, I heard privatization.
No, privately provided transportation, not public, because they have people that they need to get to work.
Well, a perfect example would be this. If you're struggling to fill jobs at a company and you offer transportation to and from work, that just saved the team member of that company a considerable amount of money, so they may be more likely to take that job at that company.
Right,
That's
and-
what you're alluding to.
Yes, and that also requires, generally speaking, some density, because you need to have enough workers in that one place to make it cost justified for the company to move forward with that. But we are seeing that happen throughout the country for larger employers. Smaller employers can't afford to do that.
Right, right. Keith Smith, my friend, what's on the brain over there?
Yeah,
we
what's
can,
on
we
the
can
brain?
pivot if you'd like.
What I'm going to pivot to is, do we have any feedback or questions on?
J.O., his wife is a teacher, says he's primarily concerned about getting the kids to school. And he's looking at it from the educational lens, as his wife is a teacher. He says even if transit doesn't make money, it may help in the long run to get employees in the door, which was your point. And multiple people are saying State Farm had vans that traveled into every surrounding county daily to help
Yeah.
employees get to and from work. Now, State Farm's balance sheet and its cash position is very different than, say, the I Love Seville network. But it was an option, and they're referencing it, and it worked well.
But guess who's not in town any longer?
Yeah, they left. Right.
Right.
I mean, the employees are still working in town. They just don't have the campus on campus.
They don't have
Well,
campus.
And that's another thing to look at, as the county did with their social services department. Often you no longer have to go to the office.
But is
Go to
that
work.
changing? I'm seeing that change a little bit.
What, about getting back to work?
I'm seeing that.
Goldman Sachs ordered everybody back to work.
And didn't Musk?
Elon Musk said if you're not coming into work, you're not working for Tesla.
Yeah, and I think that was like a couple of weeks ago.
I mean, as the labor market becomes more challenging and the employer starts getting some leverage, I think you're going to start seeing some behinds back in seats.
Yeah, I didn't see what the report came in
It was
this
a good
morning.
number.
Was
That's
it a
why
good
the
number?
market's responding
There you
favorably. I'd love to get this man's perspective in the mix. Ned Galloway.
I think my own personal view is very a pragmatic one. the type of work that we found that we were able to continue to do, giving folks the option to work from home, actually created better productivity and more efficiency for us.
We talked about that at the commission last night.
And if that's the case, then why wouldn't you want that? You're not going to do something to prevent that from happening. And if the employees feel that that's a higher quality of life for them, because then they don't have to travel, et cetera, and are still able to get the work done, well, then that's a win on both sides for each party. So, I mean, I appreciate that our county executive, we obviously did a lot of things during the pandemic that were just about, okay, this is where what exists, and we have to survive and get through this and still be able to provide services. But now that we're coming back out of it, it's, well, how does this improve the organization, and what can we learn from it? It's no different than electeds last night when we were talking about, virtual meetings and how virtual participation actually makes it easier to be involved in public service. But there's FOIA concerns and state things that limit that. So at some point, I think the conversations change to, well, what are we trying to do? What's the best? Best way to approach it, deliver those services in an efficient way. And if that means work from home, then we work from home. And we've developed a policy.
I do have to, not that I would ever contradict you, Ned, but I do have to admit, yesterday was the first time we had an in-person prior to COVID, so it's two and a half years. And sitting there and watching the body language, particularly when we do a roundtable discussion like we're doing right now, body language kind of tells a lot.
No doubt.
And you don't get that in a Zoom. So I think there was a lot of crosstalk on that, which you don't usually get on it. So,
Occasionally on the Zooms, though, for instance, Charlottesville City Council, you may see Cena McGill's cat jump on the Zoom call, which I think that's pretty cool from time to
I
time.
love seeing Cena's cat.
I love seeing Cena's cat on the Zoom.
But does that really move the agenda forward?
It's amusing.
It humanizes the
Oh,
councilors.
yeah, sure.
You have very few, when we've been in election mode, we talk about, well, why are we running in unopposed races? And we often talk about the time it takes to do the service. So if you have somebody that is retired or they're in a job where they can control their schedule, people talk about, well, a lot of the electeds are retired because they have the time to be able to go do the job. So this is coming from a supervisor that works a full-time job. When the pandemic was in and virtual meetings were allowed, it allowed me to basically be in 2 or 3 places at one time and made it a lot easier. If that existed, that ability to be involved existed, you would have more people who are probably working, who
Diverse.
have children.
Yeah.
You would have a different segment all across, so we could throw out all the descriptors,
Yeah.
probably involved because they're like, all right, at 7 o'clock, Supervisor Barlow from Louisa said I have to drive. It's 2 hours added to his evening just the drive to and back and from. And, how efficient is that? Now, I appreciate what you can accomplish with people sitting around the table and in person. I mean, you get a different networking ability, different things can build from that. But what's the greater good? If I can go from one meeting at 6, not have to travel somewhere, jump into a second meeting at 7, and I don't have to leave my house, and then at the end I can walk right into the dining room or the kitchen, that's a different equation when you go, maybe I'll run for office, maybe I'll get involved in a planning commission.
That's a good comment.
Regional, I'm on the Regional Housing Partnership, right, which we have subcommittees within them. I'm on the Land Trust, which we have subcommittees in it. I'm on CAR, I'm on UVA's affordable housing thing.
But to Ned's point, you're also 59, an empty nester, and have flexibility and freedom with your schedule.
So
That's his point.
All of these, I'm adding to that, all of these are pretty much back in person, and I gotta drop a couple. I'm going to have to drop a couple.
Well, how about the
Because I
39-year-old with 3 kids that has to work and punch a clock?
Yeah. Well, you're saying I don't, hold it, is he saying I don't work?
You punch a clock, you
Is
just
he
have
saying I don't
flexibility
work?
with your schedule.
Well, the reality is Ned Galloway is one of 2 supervisors in my 17 years that works full-time.
Yeah, exactly right.
Ken
And-
Boyd worked full-time when he was on board. His financial firm.
Ken's financial firm, but he had full flexibility because it was his financial firm.
Sure,
That's
sure.
a little.
And this man's the general manager over
True.
there.
But the
Which means
reality
he does
is.
everything.
The reality is, I've seen a lot of members of boards of supervisors come and go. The vast majority of them are retired.
Yeah.
And they spend an inordinate amount of time in the county office building.
Who was the second one you were referencing?
Kenneth Martin
Okay.
Ken Martin was,
This is a vacation call? This is
yeah,
like-
the vacation
I know you
call.
well, Neil.
He said he had, in his 8 years on the board, he never took a 2-week vacation because he had to use those vacation days for board meetings.
And frankly, that's a travesty right there. Jason Howard, we've dubbed him the king of Rio, so very much in your district here. He says, returning from Chicago recently, my connecting flight from Dulles to Cho was canceled due to weather. I was able to get an Amtrak ticket from Manassas to the train station in downtown Charlottesville for $12. Are there any plans to expand rail travels across central Virginia? And then other people are jumping on board about rail and saying, why couldn't the city county develop a regional rail collaboration with Amtrak? That's from Yancey and Waynesboro. The rails are already there. They already have one station in place. Put another station near the Belmont Bridge or someone else, and people could get off at West Main or these other locations, and it would really improve flexibility for people.
Well, the 2 lead articles in the Daily Progress is about rail. But so Virginia Rail is expanding. To that point, Yona's going back home to visit her family in Austria, which she hasn't done in 5 or 6 years. I'm going to put her on a train in Charlottesville. She's going to go to D.C. and then end up at the airport and fly cross country,
The
which
reality,
saves me a 2.5-hour drive up and a 2.5-hour drive back.
the reality of some of this train service is not positive. There are 2 trains now between Charlottesville and Roanoke. It takes 4 hours to get to Roanoke. That is not a working situation. On the other hand, the long-haul trains, I took a train from Charlottesville to Philadelphia, and it was a great ride, and I put on my Keith Smith and did work all the way up on the train, watched a little bit of Real Talk, but it was a...
Thank you, Neil.
It works longer haul. The question becomes one of, those rails exist, but what availability is there even if we had a magic train that could just appear? Because you've got to understand, everything has to be slotted to go certain places, and you're going to need some place to pull those trains off when it's not commuter time. So how does that work? I think that's what a regional transit authority could take a good hard look at. But the economics of heavy rail is much better than light rail by far. And as Christine mentioned, bus rapid transit is even better than any rail, because if the bus route isn't working, you move the bus route.
Yeah.
That's a great take. Any thoughts on that, gentlemen, before maybe a topic change?
Yeah, we can probably go to a topic change. I'd really like to get a little bit of a check-in on Albemarle County from Ned for folks who listen. What's going on in Albemarle
Is this the
County?
lasagna reference? Did you see the Free Enterprise Forum?
Yep. Sure did.
I love the from Ned. I love Ned.
Hey, Neil, no lasagna. Give us a state of Albemarle County. What's going on? And
Well, we had
Then we'll
our
do
board
lasagna.
retreat at the end of August, so that is working on the new strategic plan. So that was the first time that we saw some strategic goals put in front of us, and the board starting to react to them. And then they'll take our reactions and come back, and it'll be a whole process. And then it'll be quickly tied into our 5-year financial plan. So, meanwhile, the whole comp plan revamp is in motion and in process. But the strategic plan will come together by the end of the year, whereas the comp plan will take longer. But that strategic plan is incredibly important, because that is then what dictates budget prioritization. So a lot of times you'll hear supervisors talking and staff talking in budget meetings about how the thread connects back to the strategic plan. And our strategic plan, we usually do that every 2 years. We extended the last strategic plan by a 3rd year simply because of the pandemic, and it was a way to get through. So I'm glad to have it, to have that kicked off. I think it was a pretty good meeting. Neil was in attendance.
Only public in attendance.
And
Seats
so good at it, though.
it'll be curious to hear what he heard that day, because Neil looks at the perspective of what all 6 of us are saying and how that works.
there's your segue, Neil.
Well, I will say that, first and foremost, Albemarle County should know that their government is run in a very effective manner. This was a very good, solid retreat with discussion points that were very well thought out, and it was well structured. That being said, for a variety of reasons, 2 of the supervisors couldn't be in person at the retreat, and there were some technical difficulties. And if anytime I have 2 of 6 having a challenge there, I'm not certain I'm getting all the feedback, getting all the cues, especially in a
Well, back to
retreat
that
setting.
face- that
Right,
body.
Right. So, but the discussion points and what people have to take away from it is, this is what the supervisors think is important on a 30,000-foot level. And there are really talented Albemarle County employees that, as additional responsibilities in their jobs, help drive the strategic plan process. And what I mean by that is, they put decision points in place for the supervisors to take routes. They don't say what the routes are going to be. And as one who's done some strategery over the years, that's not an easy thing to do. It's a little bit like herding cats, trying to get them, one, focused on the topic at hand and making strategic decisions so that the county can make their budget decisions or the recommendations to fit the strategic decisions. As Ned often says, if you really want to know what a county is thinking about,
Budget
or any
season.
company- budget season.
Yeah.
Watch the numbers.
We learn from you, Ned Galloway, when you come on this program. A lot of questions coming in, but Keith Smith's got something on the brain over there.
Yeah, I wanted to go to the mustache bet and see if there's an additional bet that we want to throw on
He's
the.
trying to figure out a way not to lose this bet. That's what he's doing right here. We should tell Ned Galloway the bet. Are you familiar with their bet?
I forget the actual bet on this one.
Yeah, so Neil, would you like to do the bet?
You got a
or-
signed contract, don't you, Neil?
I do. It's
Yeah, we have
hanging in my office.
we have
Yeah.
a side contract, yeah. We do have a side contract.
It's kind of like Sheldon's roommate agreement.
Tell us the bet.
The bet is that the
It actually is. It's about 30 pages. It's
the
amazing.
zoning, Charlottesville zoning code
Yeah.
will be voted on on or before June
It's
19th
June 19th.
of next year.
Future land use map,
All the
upzoning.
future land use
So how do you
map
think
has
that's
already
going?
been
No,
enacted.
sorry, the upzoning. Yeah.
Yep, the zoning
Yeah.
itself. I will say that the efforts in Charlottesville have been well done. I still have some serious problems with some of the things in the plan, but in general, one of the things, if people take the time to read, they just put out this diagnostic, which kind of says how they're going to draw the code. There's a letter from James Frias in there that says point blank, we are looking at this through an equity lens, and we are looking at this to increase housing and also hinder gentrification. And it says it much more eloquently than that, but that's the goal. Those are goals that Charlottesville has been behind. And I believe that if the code really does achieve those goals, I believe that I will win this bet.
So the bet, June 19th, Neil says it passes prior to then. Keith Smith says, no way, Jose. If it does
My
pass,
mustache says no
if
way.
it does pass before June 19th, on set, Keith Smith is getting his mustache shaven.
I
on
didn't.
camera.
I didn't make that bet. The bet I made was a bottle of scotch. But then later he upped the bet
Right, he
with
took
you.
it to a different level. Yeah, he took it to a different
Look at
level.
that green over there.
He took it to a different level. So he's talking about the studio TV and the markets.
So I want to get Ned in the conversation, because you guys are working with your zoning rewrite, right?
No, the comp plan.
Comp plan.
The
They're
comp plan,
the
but
comp plan.
aren't we?
There will be concurrently a zoning rewrite is happening.
So I'm trying to get there. So I'm wondering, do we think Albemarle County will get its zoning rewrite done before the city of Charlottesville?
No.
Ned?
It took, 5 years to get through the last comp plan review, to get the comp plan in place? So I suspect both comp plan and zoning is going to take.
So the expectation would be you would have, 3 seats turnover?
You'd have to have competitive races.
So you got what? Price, you got Supervisor Price, Supervisor, what are the other spots that are coming up? Lepisto Kirtley, yeah?
And the.
Well, Donna's-
Ann Mallett.
And Mallett.
Donna's
Yeah.
decided it's not running.
She's not running for anything,
Or,
Ann Mallett.
yeah, so that's going to be a
Whitehall.
completely empty seat.
So 3 new spots when that comes to reality, is that what we're talking?
Perhaps. Now, the interesting thing that I was at a planning commission meeting a week ago, Tuesday, and in October of last year, the supervisors they've been kicking around fixing the zoning ordinance for a long time. And they said, do the zoning ordinance fixes in the comp plan at the same time. And we had 2 work sessions that really went poorly. And there were questions being raised about how do we change the zoning ordinance if we don't have the comp plan to direct us? In those two, we're talking about the setbacks, and the second one was about rural area uses in the zoning code and making some things by right. So they've gone back to the drawing board, and now they're going to work on the table of contents during this time while the comp plan is being developed. That being said, this past Monday, I was at a meeting with a community meeting about the comp plan, and I had the opportunity, and I did this again in 2015, it's like deja vu all over again. My small group happened to include Tom Olivier, which is great, because we have very different views of the world. And he's a good guy, and I consider him a friend. But the group was discussing these big 30,000-foot four ideas, and what fits and what doesn't fit. And one under the housing made me crazy. The staff had presented what the group had come up with somewhere, that you increase diversity and you increase density, but not near any low-dense housing. And I said, well, where are you going to put it?
Right.
Because this was comp plan language that, well, we'll make everybody happy, which means we say nothing. And so our group and at least two other groups called that out as, hey, wait a minute, you got to make a decision on who you want to be as a community. That's what the comp plan does.
It's visionary.
Is a visionary.
Yeah.
And I will say one of the best quotes from the retreat was a vision without action is a daydream. Action without vision is a nightmare.
Ooh, that was fantastic.
That's a great quote.
And who said that?
That was anonymous quote quoted by Christy Shefflin, who works for Albemarle County, and she did a great job driving the process. Would you agree, Ned?
Oh, absolutely.
This question's come in from Jonathan. He says, I'm a voter in Mr. Galloway's district here, and he asked this question: how will Charlottesville's zoning changes influence Albemarle County in any way?
I mean, I don't know the answer to that question. I think that Albemarle, our urban ring is very different than what the rest of the county is dealing with. Neil's lasagna comment talks about, in Albemarle, we think of development area, we think of rural area. And it's that's your choice. You get this or this. And should there be a second or a third? And I think Albemarle is moving in that direction where, yes, there probably should be different ways of thinking of it than just development area and rural area. We are urbanizing at a rate that means that we have to do things differently. We've been talking, Neil's heard us talk about needing a public works department. We just got done talking about transit, and the needs in the urban ring is very different than these, segmented streets that you find in a downtown city area. So I don't know necessarily that what Charlottesville decides to do will impact us, other than that we'll start to learn about what they do that could work in our jurisdiction, because you try to learn from everybody else. But I know that last night, the comment when, I forget now if it was the planning commissioner, Sully Yates, or if it was Councilor Payne that talked about they're struggling with middle density and how to make decisions on that. That's the same struggle in the county. So I know that the conundrum of middle density is one that we're going to wrestle with.
Yes. So after the meeting yesterday, I chatted a little bit with them, because as those listening, I just came from a trip out west where we were kind of working on ADUs, land trusts, and the missing middle. But I want to go back to our meeting yesterday. You used the word rural, and Jesse Rutherford said something that I think put everybody back on their, at least I did anyway. The definition of rural is pretty interpretive, right? It means different things to different folks, where, urban's a little bit easier to define. I don't know, I don't know how Neil feels about that, but it was really very interesting how people out in the so-called rural area think of rural of different definitions.
Well, I agree, but in my mind, I said except in our comp plan.
Except in our comp plan.
Rural, it's black and white in Albemarle.
Yeah.
You got 95% is rural, 5% is development area.
Got it.
Now, Jesse's point is, the reality is that, to the lasagna comment, is it's not that clean. It's not that.
For those wondering, go to freeenterpriseforum.org and just put lasagna in the search engine.
It's on the homepage. It's on the homepage.
Neil's
Donate.
house, he makes an awesome lasagna.
He makes a reference to Leslie Nielsen. You may see a little reference to Jackson Brown. I'm on the fabulous Free Enterprise Forum website right now. Neil Williamson takes topic matter that is perhaps not approachable, maybe dry, and he makes it very approachable and inviting with these pop culture references. So
Probably.
a steward and a stakeholder, undoubtedly, Neil Williamson. Support the Free Enterprise
Please.
Forum, please. James Bennett, welcome to the program. A lot of stuff coming in here.
Yeah, go.
So let me make this final comment, because and I think supervisors are starting to wrestle with, it's not just development area, rural area. And the place where we have wrestled with it was in our homestay ordinance, where we started to talk about neighborhoods that are in the rural area, but are more suburban, like,
Elizabeth
like an
Forest.
R4 kind of zoning, quarter acre lots type of deal. And that's, while rural area, it's not rural, to Jesse's point.
Yeah.
In the sense of a 5+ acre and what exists, and we have to treat those neighborhoods, although they're in the rural area, the homestay ordinance tries to attack those particular type of neighborhoods similarly to how we attack the development area. And that is the board actually starting to wrestle with those different layers than just one or the other. So I think that's something we'll continue to be challenged with, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the comp plan.
If time allows, there's something that came up in the board meeting that I want to toss towards, as a city thing, I want to toss to Neil.
Do it now.
Yeah, so first right of refusal came up last night. And it was interesting.
First right of refusal of what?
Yeah, explain.
Yeah, so first, thank you. First right, I'm learning the whole broadcasting thing.
Set the table.
Yes, dear.
And it was the TJPDC meeting that was the board meeting.
Which stands for the Thomas
Yeah,
Jefferson
yeah.
Planning
So why don't you
District
guys just
Commission.
take over? I'm going to sit here and
Give us the who,
Give
what,
us-
when, where, why.
Yeah, yeah. So in this rezoning rewrite, which I have my mustache bet on, there was a term thrown out of first right of refusal, and we didn't really at least at the time, didn't understand what they were referring to. So what turns out, what I heard in yesterday's meeting, it's rental, it's not purchase, right? And so if it's a unit over 10 acres or something, 10 units, then the city will have the first right of refusal using the, come on, help me out, Jerry, the CHITs, the,
Vouchers?
Thank you. The rental vouchers, which was kind of unique. And apparently there's a pilot going on in, I think Hartford, Connecticut, if I remember correctly.
And that's not in the state of Virginia.
And it's not in the state of Virginia, but it is a commonwealth.
There's that, but.
It is a commonwealth.
The reality is, and if you read the Free Enterprise Forum blog, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, the first right of refusal language
that at?
is the ugly of
Yeah.
that blog post. The idea that the city would have greater standing than anyone else in the marketplace to rent or purchase a property is fundamentally flawed.
Well, I just don't know how they'll get there, because the only way to do that is via a proffer, and you can't do proffers.
And it
Right.
would be a deed restriction, and you can't force a deed restriction on an owner.
That's exactly right, because it's a property rights state. So it came up. I know you're a little passionate about it, so I thought I'd throw that just a little bit, throw that out there for your sense. But I was relieved it wasn't an owner-occupied scenario. I think their argument is the landlord would be more than happy to do it to get the bonus density, because at the end of the day, it's full market rate to the landlord. I think that's the rationale.
Well,
behind it.
those are three different ideas
Very much so.
commingled.
Very
And
much so.
the idea of increasing density to provide affordable housing is something that has long been done in Virginia. And the density bonus has to be large enough to make it make sense.
Well, we talked about that.
But the bottom line is, you can't provide first right of refusal to the government for anything that I own.
Yeah, I still struggle how they're going to get there, which, if that stays on the table, that may help me out with my mustache.
This comment, the rural thing always amazes me. Living in a rural area myself, you're paying the same taxes as the rest of the county. You don't get the perks of them, no public water, no sewer. Your streets are maintained by VDOT, not the county. But again, you're still paying the same taxes, but getting less services.
Unless you're in land use, then you don't.
Well, but you do. Even if you're in land use, the house you live in is taxed at the
That's
exact
exactly
same rate
That's exactly
as anybody else. Now, the one thing that I will say is that the question becomes one as we get to the comp plan. And you get to the comp plan, and should a rural area citizen be forced to drive 35 miles to get an oil change?
Well, and
Or groceries?
yeah. How about, and here's the follow to that. People in Howardsville are paying the same taxes as someone in Hollymead or Farmington, but have none of the services.
I completely agree that the services are different, and what the original plan, and Ned, I was in some of these meetings back in the dark ages, was to make the development area so attractive that the rural area would pale in comparison. They were going to do that by making investment in infrastructure, including pocket parks and all kinds of amenities. Instead, what's happened is they've forbid certain activities in the rural area that would help rural area residents, and that's how they're making the development area more attractive. That is not what was originally planned, and if you have 10 or 20 minutes to listen to AC 44 Voices, there's a great podcast that was just put up yesterday that features a number of different perspectives, including folks that are in the rural area saying, hey, I would like to be able to get my groceries without spending a quarter tank of gas.
Yeah, but in order for that to happen, what has to come with it?
The changes, well, you could come with it with
The
performance
grocery store
standards.
is not just going to pop up in the middle of the rural area. It's just not going to happen.
Well, if
The ROI
if it was by right, it would. Albemarle County said no to a very nice convenience store, Tiger Fuel. We don't take position on projects, but that was a project that was out in the rural area that they said no to.
You got Juan Sarmiento watching the program right now. Juan,
We need Ned to jump in. 'cause
Please,
he's
please,
smiling.
please.
And all the people that lived around it who didn't want it.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So the folks that lived in the rural place that want the grocery store didn't want that one.
Understood. The folks that came to, the folks that showed up for the meeting.
So, I mean, as Supervisor Malik will often say, is that when you make the choice of where you're going to live, when you choose to live out in the rural area, you make that choice with the understanding that the services that are going to be provided are in fact different.
That's a fair point.
Because you want what you're going to get out there that somebody in the development area can't get, which is your scenery and your dark skies,
Solitude.
and your peace and your quiet.
Yeah.
So there are trade-offs to both choices, but when you make the choice to go somewhere, then that's your choice.
Right, it absolutely is, and I think that
Can't have it both ways.
when you see the valuations of rural area properties versus the valuations of Farmington properties, there is a difference in valuation.
So speaking of valuations, shout out to Woody Fincham. He just became a grandfather
Yeah.
on that. So a little shout
Fincham
out
and
to
Associates. Juan, I mentioned him. Sorry, if I'm messing your last name up, Juan, I'm sorry. Sarmiento, he's a fleet technician with Charlottesville City, and he lives in Louisa. So very much embodying kind of what we were talking about with Christine Jacobs. Questions are coming in for Supervisor Galloway of what we can do to get manufacturing back in Albemarle County, because it seems to be an economic driver that is not present here.
So the Project Enable is our economic development piece, and the primary driver behind that is how to make existing businesses, so that they can expand and grow and be here within the county. Manufacturing, I guess it would be, well, what kind of manufacturing are we talking about? I know over the newest one that will come online is they still calling it the Albemarle Business Campus, and that seems to be going into the.
Is that Kyle Reddicher?
Yes.
Yep,
Yeah.
the medical, I'm not going to say the right segment of what it is, but it's biodesign,
And it's wet labs and
things like that. That's the type of.
Let's call it high tech for sake of a
well,
conversation.
it's
And
more medical manufacturing.
Right, and I think that is, I mean, he's obviously thinking that's what is going to be successful. And that's the type of thing that
But they're high dollar jobs. I
the
would
high dollar
imagine.
jobs, they're coming in, they're doing that. We don't have for heavy manufacturing, like if you think of an old school manufacturing, one, I don't know that we have the sites even ready
We have none.
for it. And where would you put it in a 5% develop, because it certainly isn't going to be put in the rural area. So that means you're left with the rest of the 5%. Where do you put it? And then what is it? And then what is it's going to drive the impacts. So our specific piece in Project Enable has been designed around, I think the light manufacturing is something that we would be
And we're all putting
definitely
this
open
within the
to.
5%?
Yeah. So the
Which is
small
really
area
not
plans
5%?
designed to do that. You've got developers right now, or folks that are developing properties. I think folks would be surprised to know what is actually getting built and made here.
Sure.
So, along these buildings along 29, and so I think more of that can exist. But I think some of those have come to fruition because we have some good local developers that are really doing a good job targeting and building sites to make that appealing to those type of employers to come in. Project Enable likes that. The supervisors have been calling for site readiness reports so that we understand what our stock is to be able to attract if we wanted to, but no mistake about it. The way the current board has dictated their influence in the Project Enable is that it's designed more for currently housed businesses to be able to expand, grow, and live in Albemarle, not to go out and necessarily attract new businesses
Well,
in.
it is a real estate show, so, one of my struggles always is the second half of that or the first half of that, depending on how you look at it. Where the work is going to live, where are the housing going to be. I can speak to it from a Flavana Louisa perspective on that end of it, because I have clients that are trying to put in large manufacturing facilities, high-tech kind of thing, but they're not coming because there's no rooftops for them. Where are their workers? There's not enough employees, in our footprint. And then even if that's the case, where are they going to live? They're going to go to Greene County from that. So then they'll look at Greene County as a possibility because of these 2,000. Jerry's fingers are flying over there.
They are.
Do we have anything from Ed?
Well, to keep going. I like where we're going right here.
Yeah. So the that end of it, it's great to have this conversation about bringing in manufacturing and all this great stuff, but if they don't have the employee portion of it.
But the focus that the current board has isn't going out looking for what we used to call back in the economic development dark days, the white whale.
Yeah.
They're talking to employers now that have growing concerns and saying, how can we help? How can we make this better?
That's a huge pivot.
It's a huge pivot. I will say that there wasn't an economic development department when I started with the Free Enterprise Forum 17 years ago. It didn't exist. So the pivot and moving from white whales to building a sustainable environment for business growth is really very important to the sensibilities of this board. Every time you see somebody, I vividly remember the fight over Deschutes. And Deschutes went to Roanoke. Well, kind of.
Deschutes are closed in Roanoke.
Yes.
Yeah, they
Deschutes
closed their
is
tap room.
They closed their tap room.
Yeah.
The market changed.
Market changed.
And they didn't.
Category got saturated.
They did not open a second East Coast brewing facility.
Right. The headquarters on the East Coast never came to fruition.
Never came to
And it was
fruition.
going to happen by Virginia Eagle, 29 South.
Right, it was,
Yeah.
and there are new plans for that land now, and that was an economic development challenge for Albemarle County, how to deal with that. Where would something like that fit? Does it fit? Instead, we have homegrown brews. I'm thinking of folks like Reason Beer,
Rockfish.
yeah. Pro Renata,
Yeah.
all of these. That's where that market went. Economic development is a dynamic thing, and you need to have folks that are dynamic. And by the way, government doesn't work really well in dynamism. So what they need to do, in my opinion, and I've been saying this with regard to the comp plan, is proactively zone some land to be the zone that they would put that particular business in. We don't have any. There was a report that went out, looked at, it was called the Bowman Report, it's probably 5 years old now, looked at, I think, 8 different sites, and each of them scored, you score on a score of 0 to 5, and 5 is pad ready, building ready, and 1 is zoning ready and ready to go. We scored 0 on all 8 parcels.
So we'll give a shout out to Roger Johnson on the program here, Economic Development Director at Albemarle County. Roger, I enjoy interacting with you, sir. I think you're a good representation of the county. Keith, you want to jump in here? We got about 11:35 here on the clock.
Oh, got it, buddy. I'm making notes because I've been wanting to do an ED, Economic Development Director Roundtable, like Flavana Louisa, Charlottesville, Albemarle. So I think that would be a great conversation to have, and we can start chatting about it from an economic development perspective. Before we're wrapping up, it's a little bit past our go time here. Tell us a little bit about car lots. How are we doing over there?
Inventory's down, and used car inventory continues to be down, but
Sounds like
that's
housing.
what we're dealing with. But what is interesting, people trying to sell their cars seems to be increasing. So not just sell it via the consignment model, we're a way to get more than if you're trade or wholesale value. So you can do that, but they're also, people are offing cars. They're coming out to just sell them outright to
So you have
get out of
service
the car.
capability. Can I just bring my vehicle into service? Or
So
you'll
we
use
are
it?
we are a Virginia State Inspection Station.
Mm-hmm.
We are not, so you can't, when you are a state inspection, you have to be able to provide state inspection services. We're not generally open for just coming in and saying, hey, I need to get my brakes done, so
Yeah.
we're primarily focused on reconditioning.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, if somebody, so we're not out there advertising
Got
as
it.
a service place, so for somebody to come in and ask to do a state inspection while we could do that isn't necessarily they're looking us up for that reason. So we'll see what happens in the future, but right now, yes, there's a service function over there, we have technicians and all of that, but it's primarily focused on reconditioning the vehicles that come in for us to consign and then make their way to the lot. And we
You see-
recondition for other Virginia locations, not just Charlottesville.
Really?
For
So how
other
do you
car
see the
lots.
business model going? Are you guys a little excited about the future, or?
I mean, we, a few weeks ago, Car Lots announced a merger with the online car company Shift.
Right. San
So,
Francisco, right?
They're San Francisco, West Coast based. They're predominantly, well, not predominantly, they're 100% an online operation. So they have no bricks and mortar dealerships that you go to. Like us, they do reconditioning of cars, but they're not, you know, they're not in these prime locations because there's no retail element to it. So,
Will
you know,
Shift be the brand on Pantops?
I don't think we're far enough along yet to even to know the answer to that yet. I mean, we're still, what, in week 3, I think, so I
But it
think
sounds like
there's
a good
lot.
marriage, a good partnership.
Well, and on our side, we have more of an East Coast presence, we have bricks and mortar, we have retail operations, so, you know, the things that the other is bringing to the mix is going to make for an exciting partnership. So I am excited about that, but there's still just things that we just don't know yet because it's pretty early in the conversation. But, you know, there are cars on the lot, we're still getting more cars coming in. You know, I think all the dealerships are still struggling with inventory, but the fact that other folks are wanting to get rid or off their cars means that those cars become available for people looking to buy
Well,
cars.
that's really your model difference, right? If I want to, I don't necessarily want to buy, but I want to get rid of my car, I come and see you
Yep. And car lots will buy your car directly. We will do it just to compete because for the inventory.
Okay, I did not know
But
that.
it will be it's, you know, the benefit to you to consign is that you can get more than what you can. Because if you go and sell your car direct to a CarMax or to a dealership or to us, you're getting trade value.
So
You
tell me
might-
how this consignment works. I'm going to trade in my truck, which I'm not. I'm going to trade in my truck. Tell
You
me how
bring
that
it
works.
in, Car Lots does the evaluation, just much like you would receive if you were, you know, getting a trade appraised. And then we determine what the average market value for your car is, and then we target about 5-10% below that.
Sure.
And you pay us a fee to then market and sell the car. You invest in it to the point where things are needed, so like an oil change, we do require those, and then
Sure.
it has to pass all safety inspections in our inspection process. And so if you needed brakes, you need to have that done. But then even after the fee and after some investment in the vehicle to get it lot ready, when it sells, typically, folks can make a couple $1,000 more than what they make on trade-in.
So I do this, you
You
get
give
my
me
truck.
your car, yep, you own the car, but you hand it over to us. There's a listing period, and then we take care of showing it, marketing it,
Sounds like selling a house a
selling it.
little bit.
Yeah, actually, you know, and then once we sell it, we call you, great news, your car's sold, take your insurance off, and
So we're way over, and the director's going to get a little bit nervous. Thank you, Jerry, for letting us spend a little bit of time. Neil, love it when you come. Free Enterprise Forum, folks out there, please time in. And if you need to sell or buy a car, swing by and see Ned.
And I'll put out there, not that I don't enjoy my most recent Real Talk mate here on the show, but if you get Roger Johnson back on here to talk economic development, at the strategic planning meeting when we saw Project Enable, I made the comment, the fact that we are now reviewing and updating an economic development plan in Albemarle County is a first. So.
So it sounds like I just got told there's a new show coming.
There, I would love the opportunity to talk economic development more so around the comment that was made so that folks understand what our vision is and where we're going, because I'm very happy with.
Gentlemen, thank you.
our
We're
plan.
way over time.
Ned Galloway, guys, Board of Supervisors, Neil Williamson, Free Enterprise Forum, Keith Smith, all-around A-plus guy, Yes Realty Partners, Judah Wickhauer, the director, I'm Jerry Miller. Real Talk, all the shows online, realtalkwithkeithsmith.com. I Love CVille show up in 50 minutes. So long, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Well done, gentlemen. Oh, we didn't get 30 comments.
I read it.